Hello, 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 everyone out there in the web. Very excited to be here. It's a very hot day in the studio, but I think we're just going to roll with the punches. We are here today with some amazing panelists to talk about Haute Couture. I think we've had a very lively season. And yeah, we're just here to have a quick and amazing discussion about the state of fashion and couture and what we expect to see when we have these discussions about what that represents within the space of fashion. I'm Jawara Alleyne, and I'll let the rest of the panelists introduce themselves.
Hello, I'm Kerry Taylor, fashion historian and auctioneer.
I'm Michaela Stark. I'm a journalist and brand consultant.
I'm Michaela Stark. I'm a designer and an artist.
I'm Hetty. I'm features editor at SHOWstudio.
And again, I'm Jawara, and I'm a fashion designer. So the question at hand is Haute Couture dying at the hand of storytelling? And I guess for me, I would like to ask, first, establish sort of like a precedence for, because we're all from different backgrounds here, and we all sort of think about fashion in a different kind of way. And I mean, that is what fashion is. It tells different things to different people. So I guess the question is, for you guys, how do you see couture, and what does it represent, and what do you expect to see, particularly as it pertains to your space within fashion? Starting with Kerry.
Okay, well, I expect to see beautifully handmade, hand-finished garments. I think that the thing that worries me in a way is that a lot of the haute couture is beginning to look more like ready-to-wear. And especially if you look back in decades past, I think certainly Cristobal Balenciaga would, roll over in his grave if he thought that, haute couture meant denim jeans. I mean, he was terrified about miniskirts. So, and I think obviously the world needs to move on, but I'm a bit concerned that haute couture just doesn't become like really expensive ready-to-wear, which I have a fear that it could be drifting that way, because we all want to dress in a more casual manner perhaps too. So maybe times have to change, but I'm old-fashioned and I like my couture really haute.
I might be sounding a little bit contrary now, because I'm going to take a different position, but I agree with you. I think that, there's a high barrier, a high bar for brands to even be considered haute couture, right? It has to be, agreed upon. It has to pass. A lot of consideration has to be kind of considered. But I also think mixing in some of those references, I do cringe a little. I'm not going to lie when I see a denim on a couture runway. But I also think it is a conversation. It is alive. It has to keep moving. Otherwise, we become. We're talking about museum pieces, and I think it does need to continue to move on. And even the craft, I think, also has to continue to move on. But again, that's, it can vary from piece to piece. There are some pieces where I thought some of the couture we saw from Balenciaga just really felt all of those pieces came together, for me at least. And I felt like it really resonated with the moment. But I think it can vary from brand to brand. But I want it to feel alive. I don't want to feel that I'm seeing a museum piece, personally.
I don't know. What I want couture to be, or what I think couture should be something that is sewn beautifully and has those impeccable details. But I think what makes couture special is that it isn't something that can be replicated. So it's something that is done so well and so beautifully that Zara or H&M or even just ready-to-wear brands, they can't copy it, and they can't make something that looks exactly the same. I think in that way it can still be modern. I think if we look at Iris van Herpen, for example, she, in my opinion, if there was a winner, she won Couture Fashion Week, because her looks were so exceptional, so 2022 and modern, but like, how the hell did she make that? You know what I mean? Like, it's magic. And I think that to me, that's the true, what haute couture is. It's creating magic with cloth and with the body.
I agree. I think it should be really special, and I just went to see the shows, and it was my first season doing couture, so I was really excited, and what I went in hoping for was like definitely a level of like fantasy and storytelling, but like really high craftsmanship. And I definitely saw that in places, but I didn't see it as much as I'd hoped and expected from all these things I'd heard about couture. So I was like slightly disappointed in places, and I do think it goes back to what you were saying, Kerry, about, I think, especially when you're talking about couture, that because there's such a limited amount of brands showing, you are it's gonna be a lot of heritage brands like the Balenciagas. So then you've got designers at these houses grappling with history and modernity and future and trying to find that middle ground. And I think, you know, without jumping to all the brands before we go into them, I think, for instance, Gaultier was a great example of pulling on history and losing the craft. Well, as I thought Balenciaga was, like, you have stuff like, they did a neoprene covered in limestone, which was looking back to Cristobal creating the gazelle fabric, which is like really hard to work with. And I loved, in that sense, how it was like nodding to the legacy of Balenciaga, but then making it modern and finding that balance. And I think that's what I took away from, like, that's the struggle, is like, how do you keep the history of couture and make it modern and still keep it like special and fantasy and exciting and like one-off?
Still wearable, that you can wear it out somewhere, but extraordinary.
It's definitely, it's like, you know, it's made for a person. It's customized to an individual, and it's customized. In some ways, it's the most sustainable form of fashion design. You know, there's like, you make it for one person, you make it fit their body perfectly, you make it fit their, this is where the hook comes in. You make it fit everything about that fantasy. So there is something really magical about that haute couture moment. And also it is so specific to their customer. It may not suit me, but it's speaking to their customer. I just wonder also about the moment that those shows create, how important that is to kind of transcend reality, because we have to kind of get above.
And I think that moment is, for me, as someone who always grew up watching fashion shows, I always knew that I wanted to be a fashion designer, and looking at the couture shows was sort of the antithesis of or the epitome of what could be. You know, it was something that really excites young designers that are coming into the industry, kids who are looking towards fashion to sort of find out who they are, but also to find out sort of where the space of the extremeness of craft and what the extent of what you can do with cloth is. And I think that was definitely missing, but even in that conversation about progress and how do you move on and how do you keep things that are important to the craft, and I think the question is, how do you move on? How do you, in this space where we do need to push the conversation of fashion and the conversation of couture forward into the future, how do you move on without losing sort of sight of what is couture and what it stands to represent?
I think for me, the most magical shows are where you have this absolute balance of not only exceptional craftsmanship and fabrics, but imagination. And, you know, you can have the most beautifully made collection, and I think we will see some. They're a bit boring, sorry to say. They're very commercial. But where you get this combination of something new and fresh and exciting and the quality, for me, that's so hard to find, but that ticks all the boxes. And it's usually those shows that are the ones that we remember and the ones that we want to collect and put into museums, and the ones that actually have such an influence that ready-to-wear begins to adapt to those shapes or styles or looks or whatever in their own way. And that's always been the way.
But I think with couture, quality is non-negotiable. It's like quality is non-negotiable. With ready-to-wear, you can make some excuses, but with couture, it's non-negotiable.
But ready-to-wear now can cost tens of thousands of pounds quite happily. And these are things which are being mass-produced. So this is where I can see this kind of grey area between these two.
But fashion has become hyper-business. It's become how do we do what we do and make more money and more money and more money and more money.
Because I guess there's that thing as well that couture, on one hand, is a moment for houses to show the best of the best of what they can do. But then I think what we saw this season was also this problem of when you're doing the best of what you can do, is that just a marketing ploy to get people interested for ready to wear? Like I felt like going back to Jean-Paul Gaultier, I loved all the ideas, the conceptual ideas, but seeing it there, like stuff was literally gaping with safety pins. But on the images, you can't see that. So it's like it gets the media impact. There was a ready-to-wear capsule and the whole opening. So it's like, what purpose is this serving? And I think that's the crux, is like, what purpose are you serving? Are you serving your client? Are you serving the couture client? Are you also serving ideas for the ready-to-wear client? Are you just trying to make a marketing impact so that you can make money? Like, what's the
purpose?
All
I think what's interesting is when you start to look at the client and how the client has evolved, and I think that kind of tells a story on how the houses have evolved as well, because the houses that can afford to do, the houses that have that old client, that rich, more conservative client, like maybe Chanel or Dior, and they're doing the more boring collections.
Yeah, but they can do that.
They can do it because they have a client that appreciates quality and appreciates luxury and can afford it, but isn't going to want to wear something that was maybe in the Jean-Paul Gaultier collection, versus the Gaultier client, which is a lot of celebrity, a lot of people that need looks, and they literally email you asking for the look the day before that they need it, and they need it in LA tomorrow, or they need it and they need it custom made because they're not always sample sized, but they still need it tomorrow, and they need it to make a huge impact and for it to be on a world scale. And so I think that Gaultier is more appealing maybe to that client, and it's, do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, it was actually amazing seeing some of the front row at Gaultier, the clients, like they were dressed even wackier than the people on the runway. Like it was really amazing to watch, and it's interesting to see those different client bases and obviously how designers have to interact with that.
Definitely.
I think, like to your point, I think there's a way in which fashion it's an art form that's on the body. So there's a particular way that makes, I think, people who are in fashion and fashion designers have to justify the art every time. There always is this discussion, and often I think we tie fashion back to art to kind of legitimize. And the reality is, I think that, I mean, what is the worst? I mean, I think ultimately, what is the couture show for? It's there so that it's a stage. I mean, coming back to it's a stage so that we can set the scene. The ones that really stick to I think it's very true, really kind of capture a moment. If you think about all the things happening in the world right now, there's so much to ignore. All of those things is very weird. So having to kind of take those in, how does that inform the craft? How does that inform the presentation? There was a lot
I think that's
going
a very important point of looking at where the state of the world is and all the different things that are happening within the world of fashion, but just within the outer social world in and of itself. Like, we've just gone through 2 years of questioning whether or not we still need fashion shows, and then to come on the other side and to say, okay, we're going to carry on with fashion shows, but then the level of what you were putting onto those fashion shows is kind of like ask you to again question, do we really need this?
Yeah. I don't think fashion took a moment, though. It felt like it did, and then I feel like there's so much travel, so much destination. It just felt almost. Did we take a minute? I don't know. Did we? Reflect?
I think we took a minute, but we didn't embrace.
We didn't learn the lesson.
Exactly, we didn't embrace what the future of fashion and presentation and communication and branding and all of those discussions, sustainability, all of those discussions that we've had. Has they really shifted the conversation of how we, from this point on, present ourselves as designers and people who work within the space of fashion?
I think that's why it's a shame when you see couture that does feel like it's bridging on ready to wear or isn't finished to the highest degree, because this feels like in such a fast industry that this can be the one slightly slower moment where stuff's actually really considered and precise. So it's a shame to put out 150 looks. Like, it doesn't need to happen.
In that conversation of sustainability, I think haute couture is the most sustainable, because you're literally making a garment for a particular person.
Like one thing, and they will actually wear it because they've spent a lot of money to buy that. But then when you're presenting that idea, but the image doesn't back up that thought process, then there's kind of like a gap between those two thought processes.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, I don't know if couture is sustainable, though. Like, there's the argument that it's sustainable because it's made for one body, of course. But on the flip side of that argument, it's only a tiny percentage of people that can actually buy couture.
Right.
And it's made for events that aren't sustainable. It's made to wear to Like people that buy couture then get on a jet, and you know what I mean? Like it's made to wear it to places.
We can all
And
dream.
so I don't believe that. I think that ready to wear. I don't know.
Oh no, we need haute couture.
We need, for sure.
We need haute couture because you always have to strive for excellence in whatever you do, the best that can be done. And so if you would say, oh well, no, it's unsustainable, it's uneconomic, and only a few rich people can wear it, well, we wouldn't be sitting here, would we, discussing it? And we all love fashion, and I think...
but also in that discussion of craft, you know, like, haute couture holds up a lot of, haute couture houses hold up a lot of craft, you know?
Well, yeah,
we don't...
all of the, think about the difference between fast fashion, okay, but, I mean, we'll just dip in there and come back out. But, you know, you're talking about paying people probably, you know, a fairly good wage for their craft. So, and that goes into the cost, right? Or you'd hope at least that goes into the cost. And, you know, Chanel, those houses have effectively provided a kind of umbrella or protection for some of these crafts that would have probably otherwise disappeared.
Yeah, because Chanel bought a lot of factories that
were on the brink of disappearing. And I think to your point, couture is kind of on the arc of fashion's progress or its kind of development from being something that was only couture to then ready to wear, to then, you know, so it is a really important through line through fashion's history. And I think it tells us a lot about where we are right now and also maybe where we need to go. To your point, I think it's not that it's a perfect science and maybe, you know, how do we make it democratic? Does it need to be democratic?
No, for sure not.
It all filters down to the ready to wear anyway, but this gives a designer a chance to play and to do something imaginative and fantastical and a bit strange. But that will eventually filter down to something actually you could wear quite easily, and you know H&M will be copying them, and everybody, you know, it all works.
That's also very important to think of where those spaces in fashion that allows you to dream are. Because as somebody who's starting a brand, it is very hard to take that time to just play and to just do things because you have a creative integrity that says, I just want to do this because it will be a great object to exist. You know, when you were thinking of ready to wear and when everything has to be linked to something that can sell to the masses, then you lose that element of spontaneity, which is, let's just pay someone to make this beautiful object and there only can be one, because there only needs to be one, you know?
But also, you know, the fact that all of these houses, one of the big competitions really is not so much in how many dresses you sell. I think that's not as important, because they're never going to pay for the dresses that are sold will never pay for these amazing shows and models and sets and films and all the rest of it. But what it does is it raises the brand's awareness massively in terms of press and publicity. And so then they sell the handbags and the lipsticks and the perfumes. And in a way, it's a loss leader. And it's a glorious loss leader. You know.
Switching that from a conversation about the brands, but more of a conversation of the receiver, how does that affect the space of the people who are receiving fashion communication from these shows? Students, journalists, other designers, ready to wear, like, how does that filter down when haute couture, which is the top notch of our industry, is not top notch?
But it's fantasy, and we all want to sort of channel into that, don't we?
You know what I think is actually quite interesting is thinking about like what generations are engaging with it. I know I've been quite negative about Gaultier, but I did really enjoy the concepts of looking at the history from like Madonna's Blonde Ambition tour to the perfume bottles. I thought it was really fun, and you could see that it was coming from the point of view of someone who's grown up with Gaultier and like enjoyed that history and a moment of enjoyment. And you could imagine kind of people on TikTok even like picking up on these tattoo looks, which are so big on the archive market. And I think there's that interesting thing of fresh blood at new brands, even like Daniel at Schiaparelli, like there were really nice archive references this season while he's still doing his own things as well. And I think that's really interesting to have these collections also as a gateway into the history of brands for new generations to like take it and then go and do their own research.
But there's also a way, and this is really probably a question, an answer really for you as a historian, but you know, it makes really good business sense as well for a brand to have continuity. It's actually one of the most dangerous things is for a brand to just go from, you know, here to here. It actually can be really jarring in terms of, or it can work really well. It depends, obviously. But it's really smart for you know, a new designer, a relatively new designer, to reference back to the archive, right? It makes so much sense, both creatively and from a kind of commercial continuity. And I actually think, I'd love to know what you guys think about, that kind of juxtaposition between things that, collections that are commercially successful. I'm thinking of Dior, I'm thinking of a few others, where it's, commercially incredibly successful, but has not received, the kind of that dreamy, it doesn't take you necessarily to the same places that, I don't know, for me at least, for like a Balenciaga or even a Margiela show will. Yes. So what is the place of, let's say, these kind of practically beautiful, but you meant this point, they're very practical, but they appeal to a customer. I mean, where do we put those in the kind of fashion history?
Well, it depends who the designer at the house is, doesn't it? Because if you look at, for example, Galliano when he was at Dior, and Saint Laurent when he was at Dior, and Ferro when he was at Dior, I mean, they were dramatic. And it was still fabulously made and beautifully embroidered and all the rest of it. So I think
it's a false economy.
I think, it's a difficult thing for a designer because on the one hand they're being told, we've got to sell these, sell. And I think certainly with Chanel and Dior, who have all the skills, they're very well established. They can afford to be just commercial, if you like. But there have been moments in the past when it's been incredible. And I thought, and looking at the Dior show, the workmanship, the smocking, the embroidery, they were the only house to reference the Ukraine at all.
Yeah, indeed.
During a wartime, and with such beauty and elegance. But it, didn't blow. It just didn't have that energy that, say, the Margiela show did.
Do you think that goes back again to clients, though? Like, I'm interested because you probably know quite a lot about who's collecting. Because when I think about, like, the Chanels and the Diors, I think of them more as kind of the grandmother to the mother to the daughter. They are quite heritage. Like, they have that kind of established kind of status, I guess, in our imaginations of fashion, while as perhaps, if you think about Schiaparelli, for instance, it's never recaptured the magic, perhaps, that it once had. I know we had the kind of Christian Lacroix moment a few years ago, but Daniel's really been tasked with, it still has a very small clientele, and it's not trying to become a kind of Balenciaga-level brand, but it's trying to engage with and find its marketplace, I think, perhaps.
Yeah, I think it has a chance now.
Yeah, but do you think that comes into it as well? It's like whether you've got that established clientele or whether you're looking for that changes how you need to approach what you're putting out?
No, because when Galliano first moved into Dior, it was a very established clientele, with ladies with big hair and big jewels sitting there. And he kind of tore up the rule book. Yeah. And he maybe have a few, he always made sure there were a few nice little ladies lunch suits and things like that. But in the Haute Couture, he really went for it, and it was imaginative and dreamy.
But I think Galliano did have to build up to that moment. I don't think that he just got into the house and then was making these dresses.
Oh, he did?
He went into the house and he was having to prove himself by tailoring jackets and anyway, it doesn't matter. And tailoring jackets, and then he got into the couture and started making these dresses. Yeah. And he had to. No, he did.
He went straight into. But he went straight into haute couture, and it was exciting.
No, I know, but he had to prove himself before he went into haute couture. What you mean? By
internally, right?
Internally, exactly, to the crafts, through the tailoring of the jackets.
It's what's the brand looking for, right? About who they install.
Yeah, and what the qualities of that person. Yeah.
Well, you know what you're doing. Like, Maria Grazia is never going to take over the Garnier and do a big shebang, is she? They know that.
I mean, Galliano, if you like, served his couture apprenticeship at Givenchy, you see. So so that when he moved to Dior, it was the most wonderful thing, because you have all of the petit main, all of these people who can produce whatever you imagine, and I think. That still sets houses like Dior and Chanel apart, because they can make any dream come true that the designer wants, and not all of them can.
But thinking of the other side to that question, is couture dying at the hands of entertainment? Thinking of the entertainment side of the show, what does that stand to represent today? Like, what does Haute Couture as the show stand to say and to represent? Before we go into what that show actually did for this season, but thinking of just the show and what the show can do and what that stands to represent within this bubble that we call fashion, how do you guys see the show as a symbol?
Storytelling, moment to tell a story, and also now to have media impact, like that's so essential for a whole brand. But I think it's a moment to tell a story and really let your fantasy
I mean, I think you're right. I think that the center of gravity for that kind of storytelling used to be magazines, right? Used to be editorial, used to be lots of things, and it just isn't that anymore. I come from many years working at Vogue, I say that with love, but it has moved on. So where is the center of gravity? The center of gravity is social media, it's out there between people, it's conversations. Maybe it always has been, but the net is much wider. The net is much wider. I think that's really exciting. And I think that feedback loop has come back and also informed what kind of couture we're seeing, for better and for worse. There have been some great things about that, and there have been some downsides, right? So as in everything. But I think that it's really important to acknowledge that that center of gravity, that how we would learn about, or people would learn about couture, is completely different. So then the stage also has to be different. And then the show has a very different, the brands, if anything, are now the center of gravity because they're directly communicating to their customers.
Right.
Yeah. Even if their customers aren't there, they're getting that direct, right in the moment, live. They're seeing it, before even, the fashion editors get a chance to respond.
Right.
And I think what's interesting that you bring up Instagram and you bring up the way that it's shifted from editorial. And I was thinking this the other day, that Instagram has almost turned into a fashion show itself, whether or not that's just from the content creators or from whoever.
It's like people that don't even engage with fashion, it's like that media impact by visual imagery that you just, it perforates
There's one
everything.
particular TikTok meme that a friend of mine in the Cayman Islands were always back and forth. It's the one that is like, fashion shows be like, and it's just this thing where there's
with that thing like
chairs and
it's ridiculous. And I just think it's so hilarious that as a show, it brings a space that actually the show in and of itself can create a representation of meme culture that will last for centuries. But then the question is, what is the balance between the two? I think we were speaking of that, of like embracing the future of communication and fashion and the social sides of how our sort of network and communications work, but at the hands of what? I think it's important to have this presence on social media, but
I think Balenciaga is like a great example of that with the celebrity. It's like
I think they kind of won, didn't they, hands down in terms of I've got sons who are not interested particularly in fashion, but they'd all seen that show on Instagram. It was because of all the celebrities. Love the Baker foil dress.
Yeah, same.
And it was such a strong collection, but absolutely, and there've been some great spoofs of it as well, like the pet cone. I think that one's been called. But it's hands down. They won that.
Did you find that off-putting? Do you find that off-putting when you see something and you're like, that's so obviously been done for impact? Like, I've personally felt like some of the looks, I didn't feel like the wearers completely embodied them.
I think number 54 won. Number 53.
Which was 54.
This is beautiful, and this is actually based on an original Cristobal Balenciaga piece, which I think from memory is 1960, and he did something very similar in yellow. And I love this collection because it's so strong all the way through. It's so powerful all the way through, be it sort of black neoprene or green satin. You kind of know immediately which show this is from. It's so identifiable, and I think that's why this collection is going to be one of the ones that all the museums want a piece from going forward, because it was absolutely stunning on every level, plus celebrities.
But I think as well, Balenciaga does a great job at sort of staring social media in the face and say, we know that we have to embrace this, but there is no compromise with like what the fashion stands to represent in and of itself. And they do play with that within the communications.
I feel like they almost like take the piss a bit.
Of course, because it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
But it's like you have to be honest with saying that this is where we are. We're so hyper visible and everything is everywhere all at once, you know?
Yeah.
And you can't ignore it. So you have to place it and say, this is the reality of the world that we live in.
Yeah, and I think that that's also what Daniel at Schiaparelli did in a different way, not as, but in a very different way. He said, you know, I'm just making something that's beautiful. Am I allowed to make something that's beautiful? And I think that that's a really nice way to show fashion, is that in a way it is an art and it is something that's beautiful, and we're allowed to enjoy it, and we're allowed to do season after season of it and have fun with it. But possibly in a way that we don't take ourselves so seriously, given everything else that's going on.
I mean, I think that's actually a really good example, because Schiaparelli was like, it was very much, in the earliest days, it was about humor and wit and kind of a little bit of a wink to the kind of surrealism. And, you know, when things are very dark, like it's easy to understand why you'd start to get a little surrealist, right?
I think the world is surreal right now.
So I think this idea of like bringing back the humor and the kind of, you know, the huge breastplate and the kind of, it's like, it is, it's not that it's funny and a kind of ha-ha funny. It's a funny and it's like ironic. It's got a little wink. There's something there that has humor.
I did like how he toned down all those really fab, like, gold molded bodysuits that he did with like the breasts and stuff last season, especially in ready to wear.
Yeah.
I liked how he toned that down a bit this season. Like you've got the quilted, I think it's look 5. Is it 5? It's like a quilted, oh no, maybe it's the one before. He did do this white molded one, but then he did quilted ones, and it felt a bit more subtle and not leaning on that so much, but still having these kind of winks and humor, and you can see these little old Schiaparelli references in there as well.
I mean, it was a joyous collection, and again,
I really enjoyed it too, actually.
And not only the clothes, but the earrings and the accessories.
Hats were gorgeous.
I mean, the earrings were verging on the maddest point of the 1980s, and I just wonder if we're actually going to drift into an 80s moment soon again in fashion, because it was big and bold.
I think the 80s dresses have come back.
But I mean, I think in terms of making, you know, new designers, we're always, you know, sort of looking back and reusing ideas in fashion. There's nothing new ever. But with this, it also reminded me a bit of, you know, Le Croix in the early 90s with, again, the exuberance. And the sort of luxury and the use of beautiful fabrics and all those flowers and gold and metal. I mean, it was just fun, really.
Yeah, there's definitely certain collections that presents the honesty of humanity, and I think that is also what fashion stands to represent. I know that we've built an industry on the business of selling clothes, but it's also an industry which the communication is the business of identity and telling people who they are and saying that this is who we are as people, you know, and you can't
or escapism in
or
this.
escapism.
Yeah, exactly.
This is pure escapism.
I think it's more about fantasy. It's more about it's this is an aspiration of who you could be, and that's what fashion is. It's taking you off the street, like streetwear, and saying, presenting a fantasy and an aspiration that maybe isn't even achievable in real life.
But as human beings, our entire existence centers around our ego and the way that we think about ourselves. And I think that this is the reason why fashion is so popular for everyone.
For sure.
Yeah.
Even the people that say they hate fashion, you know, there's that hate-love thing where we are ego drivers. Like that is what our entire existence is sort of surrounded about. And you know, when you have presentations about identity where there's no conversation about identity there, it's sort of really refreshing when you see beautiful fashion that says, this is something about you, and it makes you feel something about yourself, you know?
Well, I think I read in an interview with Demna that he felt that actually his couture collection was sort of a way of showing people who kind of put him in a box, that he was kind of the streetwear guy, the hoodie guy.
Yeah, right.
You know, that was his thing, and that he couldn't really go to that level of couture. And he felt that it was a way to show that he could, but also that he could learn from that. He, you know, is humble enough, I think, to admit that that was a learning process for him. And I also love the fact that he, himself obviously is so affected by world events that are happening in Ukraine that he's taken that also on board within his collections. Maybe not so much of this couture, but I think there's a way in which he's using this as a way to express his identity. I think that comes through. It's not only like a reflection of the wearer or a reflection of the audience. It's like his own.
Yeah, there's a point of view. There's a point of view.
Yeah.
I think even when you think of the history of fashion, when the American designers were moving to Paris, the Japanese were moving to Paris, the British were being brought to Paris, there was this feeling of like, this is a point of view, this is an identity, this person has something to say about clothes. Selling clothes is separate from what you have to say and how you stand to represent, and I think that there's a lot of that is not being seen. The point of views, the point of references that says, I'm questioning something here.
Well, I don't know about you guys, but I also resent a little bit this idea of I think there is a lot of validity in respecting the craft of couture, and in some ways it's a much more straightforward value system. But I think this idea of kind of, certainly in the editorial world, of kind of judging designers, I think that was what I thought was very interesting about the collaboration between, I think there were some interesting collaborations this season that kind of were surprising in a way. And I think they kind of brushed up against some of this editorial snobism,
Right.
And I think that's interesting too. To keep
What do you mean the editorial snobism?
I'm trying to think. I thought that might be a Pandora's.
Let's open it.
No, I think there are brands that resonate with. They're kind of considered purist, and they resonate with, people who consider themselves really knowledgeable in that space. And I think they're not often brands that aren't given a chance if they're maybe too commercial or they have too close of a relationship with social media. I mean, there isn't just one, but I think you could definitely say Olivier from Balmain, he definitely fits in that. He's always done a very good job of courting social media followers, I mean, whether you like that or not. And so that juxtaposition I thought was interesting.
So you think there's a bias against him for that in the elite editorial world?
I think so.
That's interesting.
That's why I was really sad when I saw just really badly finished things, because the ideas were so great, and I think I read interviews where he was saying what an amazing time he had working with the team, and just how many ideas he even went before he said he showed Jean-Paul 200 sketches before he'd even looked at the archive. He was so excited about it, and I think that conceptually he did a really brilliant job. And I was really sad for him that there wasn't someone saying,
but
these things need to be done.
But don't you think that a lot of it was quite repetitive at the beginning?
Yeah,
and actually, if they'd cut this show down,
that's the ready-to-wear capsule at the beginning, which I just don't think you needed. But I just mean in response to what you were saying, I think it's annoying because it gives his critics already time to told you so. When actually I think he did do conceptually.
I think the show was conceptually really successful. I mean, even thinking of if I saw this show as a kid, I would have felt so represented. But it's a shame that the conversation that you have to have is the fact that it's couture, and couture needs to be on a certain level that says these clothes are beautifully made.
But if they'd had fewer looks and better made,
I agree.
and a stronger message,
because there are these and
there
those
are reiterations, aren't there?
Yeah, those pregnancy mouldings. There are so many messages in here, and I think if it had been refined down, those could just.
Do you think that? Why do you think that is? Do you think that is the need to sell being placed above the importance of him being in that house and being able to present a couture collection that is his vision, which is really done well?
I mean, I'm sure that's probably true. I also think, though, that there is this kind of long-windedness. I mean, I'm thinking of the last Gautier show. There was a lot going on there. I mean, I remember at some point just being look, 120. It was a lot. So I don't know, maybe they share that in common, or maybe they were just so excited to collaborate.
Valentino is 102 looks. So I was like, come on.
I mean, maybe it's the sign of maturity or time to grow together. Then maybe if they have another season, they can kind of
thing of being guests. You only have this one chance. So it's
I feel
let's do it
we're
all.
also in that era of hyper numbers of looks. When we really don't need 105, 200 looks, but it seems like that is the precedent.
Balenciaga was 50-ish, wasn't it? And they were all,
It felt really refined and tight.
Huge impact.
Right.
With colour, with shape, with texture. You know.
Quality or quantity?
I love this show.
I mean, another kind
The
of...
show is amazing.
That's in 36 looks for Glenn Martin's Gaultier. That's like the perfect amount, I think. And that, again, it's like Balenciaga. It felt tight, concise, felt like a clear message. And
It had the fantasy of haute couture as well, like this last dress. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it's
I think it's also nice to note that Gaultier is also including different size models. They're including really things that are relevant to pop culture today. I know that there's not a lot of houses that are doing that at the moment. Like obviously Balenciaga's doing that.
Valentino's really good at that.
I think just on that point, because I was thinking about this earlier with Valentino, like we'll talk about it because I'll let you finish. But with the Valentino thing, it's like some of the dresses that they fit the bigger girls in are like not the most exciting, lovely dresses, and I think. Like we could just see, I loved it. What Olivia did, that he didn't kind of segregate them to just like the one color type, it's stretch material, you know.
What's so special about couture is that it's actually so much easier to make a couture look for a plus size girl than it is to make ready to wear for plus size, because once you start getting bigger, you get bigger in all different ways. It's impossible to standardize that. But couture is like an easy thing to do for different size models, and to do something really beautiful that really fits the body and can project something completely new. And it's true that I don't think that Valentino did that nearly as well as Gaultier did it for I think it was just one look that they did plus size, but I think they did it quite beautifully.
I think as a designer, he's quite committed to diversity and inclusion. I think even if he doesn't get it right every time, I think as an artist, I know I've interviewed him before. I know that is a big priority for him, which I really respect, because it isn't. Frankly, it just isn't for most. And I think you got this either or thing. You either get plus size or you get it's like, why can't we have both?
Gaultier had both.
Yes,
exactly. It's kind of like the questioning of what is inclusion. Is it we need a particular model that looks like this, or is it we need to shift our business structure so it incorporates and embraces this new way of creating fashion for the market?
I don't think there's any excuse for couture, to your point.
Exactly. It's like couture clients are plus size. Couture clients are all different body sizes. You don't actually have to shift your business model at all. For ready to wear, you have to shift it completely. You have to flip it on its head.
Most of them are tiny, I have to say.
Oh yeah? But some of them are.
I think it's
it is a system thing that needs to change. You know, like I was talking to Casey from Mugler about his spiral jeans, because he always puts loads of really different body shapes, and I was like, well, you know, can you actually buy those like in the shop? And he was saying, yeah, because I use a bigger fit model so that I have that right from the ground up. And I know that that's a massive system change, but like it just needs to happen. Like we're in 2022, you know, like that structure needs to change.
Yeah. It's not easy though. You have factories fighting back from day one.
No, completely.
It's like, it's a fight.
But like, I feel like a lot of people try and then they're just like, oh, it's, you know, whatever, it's too hard. And actually it doesn't matter because it doesn't affect me, so whatever, you know?
I do think there was some interesting, I mean, obviously this wasn't the first show back from, you know, not having physical shows, but it still feels like we're kind of all a little bit out of practice.
Yeah.
I think to your point about, you know, you felt kind of disappointed in that show. I wonder that, I don't think everyone's just quite back in the flow.
Yeah, it's a bit like that.
Feels kind of very hit and miss. And I do think that kind of reflected in the shows to some extent. If we're measuring a collection based on, like, what are we measuring a couture show on? Are we measuring it on the kind of the theater, the drama, the feeling we get? I think that is important, to your point.
Very important, yeah.
Are we measuring it on, you know, how happy the consumer is with their piece that they love and wear forever? Or is it a combination of both? I mean, because I think that does then come back and make us sort of evaluate a collection differently, you know, whether it's Virginie's collection, Chanel. I mean, I think Karl Lagerfeld, you know, he was a master of the theatrics, right? You know, the spinning globe, the melting glacier. Can you imagine having a melting glacier now? Like the uproar. So she was always behind the scenes. You know, she was described as his right hand and his left hand. You know, she was always there. But the theatrics are less. They're less extreme. I guess what I'm after is like, what do we think? Do we feel like there were shows that got it both? I mean, I know we've talked about Balenciaga. Were there others that we felt really got that balance right?
Can I answer with a question?
Margiela was exciting, wasn't it?
Margiela was amazing.
Yeah.
That was when I really felt hit. Yeah, definitely.
And I think everyone in the audience at that show, it felt, were you at that show?
Yeah.
It felt blown away.
It felt like a moment.
Yeah, were you there as well?
No, I'm sadly I was working, but no, I mean I've watched it like many of us have online. Yeah. But even watching it online, you know, it's a magical thing.
Definitely.
It was really
I was really blown away by it, and it was not just. I mean, obviously the set, the whole production. There is a risk that can just completely take over. But the clothes, it was like the good old days. There was like they were just magical again.
It was like the characters, but not costumes.
It was like freedom and. I mean, absolutely beautiful, and there are things, you know, in the show that reminded me of, you know, of collections from Dior in terms of, you know, the baby doll looks, in terms of the beautiful tent coats, like the René, some of them, oh, I love this. Like this, you know, the René Gruot collection, this one here. And, you know, it's obviously all of these elements are, you know, still swimming through, you know, John's mind. And I mean, just look at these. Unbelievable. So beautiful. And I think the show with Margiela was, it just had that fantasy as again. Plus it was exciting in terms of...
Thank you.
And it contextualized the clothes a lot, even though it was this fantasy, like play, like Bertolt Brecht sort of thing. It still put the clothes into context and made you see how you could actually wear them. That isn't just walking up and down the runway show.
Right.
I love the bunny hat.
Gorgeous.
Don't you?
Thinking of the impact that the season has had, outside of this show, I think this show is phenomenal. But outside of this show, which other shows do you think like really hit it with, on both sides, and on the side of the history and craft of Haute Couture, but also in the need to embrace storytelling and entertainment as...
Well, I mean, I get excited when you ask questions like that. I do think that, I mean, for me, this was one of the first couture seasons I haven't been there, actually. I mean, I was sort of officially on the road for many, many years. So it was actually kind of nice for me to see it this way. And I'd say, I mean, I think Iris, I think that collection for me felt, you mentioned it earlier, I think it just, it has this kind of very much meeting the moment. I mean, I think she's open about that. She says, I want to be looking forward. I don't want to look back, right? And I know there was like a digital AI component that didn't end up working out, but the fact that she's experimenting and she hasn't sort of closed herself off to remain pure, I think, and obviously, and it hasn't, the work hasn't suffered.
It's always important to think
absolutely
of the future.
Stunning, yeah.
Whatever we're
But her pieces are timeless, aren't they? I mean, she stands outside of fashion in a way someone like Madame Grès always did.
Right.
So she will do whatever she wants, however she wants, forever. And she won't be influenced by a particular hemline or silhouette or whatever.
I mean, she's been 3D printing since like 2009.
Yeah,
it's
she's
crazy.
remarkable.
And I think what's super interesting, you mentioned that there was meant to be this whole digital element. Like people, they collaborated with Microsoft and they were meant to wear Oculus glasses and there was meant to be like holograms over the top of some of the dresses, and for some reason that didn't happen. I'm sure she'll do it later. But what that kind of raised to me, which I think is really interesting, is thinking about like digital fashion design, which is such a thing now. It's really interesting how much Iris's work is so heavily referenced. If you're thinking about what's the future of fashion look like, what does that look like in the digital world? Iris's aesthetic is so perforated throughout that, and I think it's really interesting, like just to think about how this mix of like 3D printing and craft and something, you know, you think about Haute Couture, which is so on the hand.
It's this really nuanced conversation that says, we're thinking about that, and this is real. There's also this. Also, you can't ignore that, you know?
Yeah, like looking forwards.
But also, it's very honest. It's like, it's always her. It's always just her vision and her point of view.
And it's showing something new. Like, she might be referenced, and people have referenced her, and we've seen collections that look similar in the past, but no one's done this really before, what she's doing. And it's proof that you can keep creating. There are new silhouettes out there. There's new techniques out there to be explored. And there's completely new ways to make a garment, and I think that this is living proof of that, and this is really where all the other designers should be in haute couture, but I just don't think.
Was there any other designer that also, outside of those two, that hit that mark for you guys?
I really like Schiaparelli, but I know we've talked about that already.
Yeah.
I wouldn't necessarily say I'm a Schiaparelli woman, or frankly, I'm not sure I would embrace it as a client. And I mean, that's kind of a weird concept, because obviously these are like hundreds of thousands of pounds or whatever. But I think it's important to think about it. Would I want to wear it? But I also, I guess, see the beauty of the line. I think it makes this beautiful kind of touch back to the history and to the archive. And again, I love that sense of humor, and I think it will be perfect for some people. Like, you can see some people, like I can see Beyonce wear it. I can imagine some people wearing it and just owning that.
I didn't see so much of a sense of humor in this collection. I saw it as super. I mean, I could. It's just perception. Yeah.
For me,
I just
anytime
saw
you
it
have
as
a hat,
very like it's referencing old collections all the time, and almost in every collection you can pinpoint
nipples
the
on the-
designer that they referenced. And I find that it's almost in direct contrast to Iris van Herpen, in that they're going really back in history, not really presenting anything new, not presenting anything we haven't seen before. It's beautiful, it's stunning, but it's.
Do you think haute couture needs to be forward-facing, looking into the future?
I don't think it needs to be, but I'd like it to be.
Yeah, I mean, Carl always referenced, the house when he was, working for Chanel, and still managed to make incredible shows. So it's possible to do both, and and I think this show was very satisfying in terms of meeting, looking back at the past and creating something new and naughty, especially that one.
This was the first one I went to, so it was my first ever couture show, and they had this music, which was, I think it was actually the Jurassic Park soundtrack, but to me it sounded like, I don't know, something from like Cinderella or like a child film, and these women were coming out with these curtains, and I felt like, God, this is such a fantasy.
This is what you wanted.
Yeah, and it felt so exciting and like fantastical and amazing.
Look at that, Jewel.
Is one way to answer that question maybe to look at the collections that just did not do that? Because I actually think there are the collections that really stood out.
Oh dear.
I mean, there are the collections, for me at least, that I thought, oh, I wish I was there. There was like 2 or 3. We've talked about those. I think there were collections I saw where I felt disappointed, and I thought, really, that's all you're going to bring to this? But and so maybe the best way to answer that question is to go the opposite side.
I feel like I'm gonna just go right in there.
Go for it.
I feel like Fendi by Kim Jones has just gone like that for me. Like from the opening during, he did his first show digitally during lockdown, and he had guys there. He had like this really interesting asymmetrical play on tailoring, and guys wearing dresses. And I was like, oh, are you gonna shake stuff up? There was lots going on. And this was like so bland in color. Like if you look at old Carl Fendi collections, they were so colorful and vibrant. This is like so bland. Like the embroideries are beautiful, and actually seeing some of the like sequin and embroidered looks in movement there, like the shimmer was really gorgeous.
Yeah, the sparkly ones were stunning, but
love them. But I just felt like, oh, I'm not going to remember this.
Do you think though?
I wonder about the awful see-through bits, the see-through phase.
What, near the end, the kind of chain.
It's got kind of that
didn't speak to you.
I thought it was dreadful.
I love a see-through moment.
Did you love those see-through
Why do you
moments?
think that is? Because you say that it's gone down. Why do you think that?
I think
Love this one. I love the sequin.
Helen is trying to cater
I don't
to
mean
them.
there's some which are just plain.
Without being rude, I could see some of the clients
because they
on the
haven't
front row,
been
and I
sewn
could see
up
them wearing
properly.
Oh yeah. Maybe I don't remember.
Do you think it comes back somewhat, because I think it's hard to be, he's covering a lot of ground, right? He's trying to be Carl, kind of, if you, I mean, in a way, in the sense that he's trying to do a lot.
And doing Dior at the same time.
Yeah. And I wonder if maybe, like, if I look at a designer and you see where their center of gravity is, where is that? Like, usually it's like, is it their men's collection? Is that where you're like, oh yeah. And then that kind of radiates out, and you see that inspiring. That's how I feel about Kim Jones. I feel like his men's collections are where I feel like he's more creative, and he's curious, and he explores. And I don't feel that couture is his most comfortable place. No. So I think he borrows from his experiments and continues them on to couture. And maybe that's where there's a misfit. I'm not sure.
I also do feel like Kim is a menswear designer, and I don't mean this in a rude way. I think he's a brilliant designer, but in a way that menswear functions in that different mentality of almost product based in a beautiful way. Like menswear is my favorite thing, but like the details and how stuff works is different to women's wear, and I just don't think he works in the same kind of artistic showmanship way as perhaps we want from a women's couture collection.
Is there anyone else that you were at the shows and you just did not get that feeling that you were looking for?
Chanel.
No, I wasn't there, but I can't say I was disappointed.
It was not good.
I mean, it's really commercial and fabulous quality, but this is the first look that came out, and I thought, oh no.
I actually don't hate that, you know.
I don't hate it either.
And then it's just more and more and more of the
I quite
same,
like
these
it.
sort of midi-length skirts.
I don't think it's memorable, but I really like it.
No, I don't think. I think you're right.
I mean, it's just.
Did you expect?
I
Yeah,
don't
that's-
know.
But Dior did something more commercial, but it was at least, there was beauty in it. It was refined but beautiful.
I
Whereas
think the issue, my issue with Virginie's Chanel, with her ready-to-wear, I find it a bit like trying to, like, kind of an older clientele trying to be young and hip and doesn't know quite how to be trendy. Like, it feels a bit like it's trying to be trendy and cool, and I think I sometimes can't even look at the ready-to-wear. I find it a bit difficult. Whereas with couture, I find she's trying less. It feels like she's a bit more confident and less trying to, you know, do something different and new and just embracing the house. Yeah, and I think it works better when she does that.
I mean, also, I think if we're honest with ourselves, we did an experiment where we covered the brand labels.
Sorry, it's awful.
it's what you wear on an airplane.
Okay, I would happily wear that. But I think that we're a little bit blind because we're missing the incredible context that Carl would have given this piece.
Right.
So we would have been awed by the supermarket recreated, or the airport recreated, or the cafe recreated, or the glacier recreated, and I think that these were always, she was always there creating these collections, and we were seeing them maybe held together in a different way. So I'm trying to give her a bit more benefit of the doubt. I agree with you. I think it's not particularly memorable, but I would equally happily wear any of that stuff.
It's really commercial. It's really commercial.
Yeah.
They'll sell tons of that
Yeah,
in
that's the
comparison
thing.
to,
It'll sell.
say, Schiaparelli.
And when it's going to
you know.
sell, can you even argue? You know?
I think it has a place.
You can still say it's ugly.
You should say if it's ugly.
But do you guys feel that, because I feel people give, sometimes female creative directors, female designers, they get that shtick of being kind of more practical. I mean, and sometimes that plays out, but I certainly think Maria Grazia has been given that.
Maybe they are. I hadn't thought of that.
They're given a lot less, yeah.
But I think Maria Grazia actually presented a really beautiful collection. I was ready to look at it and not like it, actually, but then I was like, this.
Oh, I mean, in terms,
is nice.
in terms
This is
of
stunning.
workmanship and quality, it was the top show, wasn't it?
Definitely.
Yeah.
But then she also had amazing design to back that up.
Also, was it the Tree of Life, which does feel like, you know, we all need to be thinking about the Tree of Life. It felt very uniting and you know, bringing, to your point, I think earlier when we started our conversation, bringing all of those things together, like what's happening in the world with, you know, involving the Ukrainian designer, the strengths of the house, all the gorgeous kind of craftsmanship, and the whole thing kind of came together. So I definitely give her props.
I think with that, I have to ask one last question. So, thinking of the future of couture, what do you want to see from next season, or what do you want to see designers in the next sort of few seasons really lean into? Starting with you.
I think, leading off what we've just spoken about, I think worrying less about what everyone else is doing and actually thinking about what matters to your house, what's that heritage, who's your client, who are you speaking to, who do you want to speak to, and what's true to your brand. I think in ready-to-wear as well, everyone is a bit guilty of trying to do everything. Like, you'll get a menswear designer who 3 seasons later is doing jewelry, women's wear, perfume, and I get it because of the money side, but you know, you don't need to do everything. And I think the best collections this season were the people who, you know, may not have always had the biggest entertainment factor, but really stayed true to like
to what they were there to do.
And what they want to say.
I just think it's a shame because couture at the moment, I see it really as something that's not breaking any boundaries. It's not pushing forward, it's not making big statements. And the houses that are, like the one that to me possibly made the best statement was Gaultier, and then their craftsmanship was not up there. I think maybe also Balenciaga did, but it wasn't in such a way that it's like, let's remold the fashion system, like there was no one taking those really, really big, brave steps with also having that craftsmanship in hand with those big steps. And I think given the state that the world's at today and given the chaos that we're in and given the fights that everyone's undertaking for activism, for diversity, for whatever they're fighting, you know, I think that fashion could fashion has a big platform to be at the forefront of that, and to be using couture and using these amazing techniques and using the literal body to fight and to push forward really, really strong, memorable things. And I think it's just such a shame that I'm not seeing that at the moment. We're seeing more collections for more rich, boring people. And it's like, okay.
What about Emily?
I actually really agree with what you said, but I'll add to it maybe my own perspective, which is I think I'll switch it for the watchers, for the consumers. I think we should really allow some of these designers to experiment. I feel like we're so hypercritical of their process sometimes that I imagine must be so paralyzing for some people to kind of put their work out there and have it not received well.
Yeah, right.
And so there needs to be experiment. I think any great designer has had a moment where they've flubbed, not just in terms of their actual creation or their collection, but their personal life. I mean, I can think of a few where they've made disastrous, terrible mistakes. And they were given an opportunity to come back, whether it was because people believed in their creative process or for lots of other reasons. So I think maybe if we let these creative directors experiment more, they would feel like they could broaden out what it means. I feel like we are also part of the reason why it has become more and more narrow. Definitely. And I think social media, ironically, even though we're about a community and expanding out, somehow like all of the kind of hate speech around when someone does something different, or there also is a kind of a vicious feedback loop as well. So I think how can we open out and broaden our acceptance and let these creative directors experiment and have a process.
Yeah. I feel like I've been told this a lot as well. It's like when you're on a roll of receiving good feedback, you start getting people telling you, now you can't screw up because people are going to be looking out for it. If you do one bad image, if you do one thing wrong, it's going to really hurt you. And it makes you not want to produce any work anymore. It's like, of course I'm going to make a mistake in the future.
Take a chance creatively or casting-wise, I mean.
Exactly. So if that's on my level, imagine these designers that have so much money behind them and clients and these big heritage brands. It's true that whether or not that needs to be in the landscape of haute couture is a different question. But you're right, we should be giving these designers a bit of a break and allow them to experiment as artists as well.
What about you, Kerry?
I'd like it to be more about the clothes and less about the celebrities. I think we're in danger of this whole thing just becoming a celebrity fest. And and it's lovely to see them all, and it's very nice that they're there and everyone, and Paris Fashion Week is so exciting because of that. But if it all becomes about who was at the show and who was in the show and not the clothes but who, it's taking attention away from the creativity of the designer, essentially. So I'd like to see the shows to be about the clothes and about the message of the designer and these other people, as postscripts, if you like.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think that was exactly what I would say too, is like the embracing of fashion being, again, about just making beautiful stories about clothes, and everything else is there to support that. I know we need to have conversations with celebrity and TikTok, etc., but if the clothes are not good, then
But we don't want it taking over.
No, of course.
I fear it's beginning about to, you know.
Right. I feel like that is sort of the tipping point.
I think it already has.
I don't think there's any going back from that, unfortunately, or fortunately, however you.
What about back in? I could be wrong, and you might have it really. I don't know. But back in the day when it was about what were, like we were talking about Marie Antoinette before, what was she wearing in court? They would all draw what she was wearing in court, send it over to England, and then they would replicate that. And so it was like, is there not an argument that it's always been a bit about the celebrity, in a way?
I think celebrity is fine in its place, but when it starts taking over completely, it's a bit like the Duchess of Cambridge. Whatever she wears, people will be wanting to wear the same thing, and it's always been thus. But what concerns me is that it's becoming about, you know, Christine from Selling Sunset.
Love her.
I know, hasn't she lost so much weight though? There was nothing plump about her apart from her lips, you know, poor Christine. But, you know, I just feel that it's becoming too much about that and not enough about the clothes themselves and the designs themselves.
There was an analogy that my university teacher told me about. I think it was Ford when he was inventing the horse-powered cars. He said, if you ask people what they want, they would have told you faster horses. You know, and it's that idea of everyone needs to be in conversation with everyone. Like nothing should overtake, the fashion can't overtake the communication because you need both and everything needs their place. And it's very important to have your message be put out there, but also it's very important that you're also creating something of value to put out there. But I think that wraps up the end of today's conversation. And yeah, I think it was rather exciting. And I think that's us.
And I think we all like the same things, which is interesting, because
Yeah,
we're all from different worlds in many ways, but we all came out with the same.
It's true.
Okay, next Thursday at the pub.
We should start a podcast. Yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you guys for joining us. And yeah, that's it. See you soon.